You ready? Oh, it's not going to be on our screens. Okay.
What? Oh, no. Okay.
We can just, make do. We're tough here.
I brought my pointer and everything.
There you go.
I can get to yours. Okay.
Oh, it's the old, is it plugged in technical support? Did you turn it on, technical support?
I did turn it on. Okay,
Just about as new as Will and I. So
we are.
I'm still trying to figure out what to turn on now. So.
Okay. Good afternoon, Pam Dunn for the record. We are here today to talk about the Veers Mill Master Plan. As you may recall, the recommendations on land use and zoning are presented by district for specific properties. And at the last work session, we covered the Newport Mill District, the Connecticut Randolph District, and the Robindale District. Today we're going to cover land use and zoning recommendations for the Twin Brook District, as well as recommendations on parks, trails, open space, the environment, and public facilities. And we're also going to circle back to the Department of Recreation Administrative Office site following the committee's discussion of Gannon Road Extended, which occurred on Monday, and recent correspondence we received from the county executive. So, beginning with the Twin Brook District. This district starts at the Rock Creek Crossing, Veers Mill, and it runs to Twin Brook Parkway, then turns and runs along Twin Brook Parkway almost up to the metro.
Got a map there?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, yes, that's pretty much it. Because it primarily consists of 4 garden-style apartments: Rock Creek Woods, Halpine View, Parkway Woods, and Halpine Hamlet. In general testimony that we received, the executive expressed concern with redevelopment of existing market affordable housing, and the Sierra Club weighed in suggesting that proximity to transit would support and should support increases in density. 2 properties are owned and operated by HOC and MHP, the Housing Opportunities Commission and the Montgomery Housing Partnership, respectively. They are tax credit supported renovations. They were recently developed, and they don't expect to look at redevelopment for another 10 to 15 years. The
You said
plan,
which properties were those? Both?
that's the HOC and the MHP properties, the one outlined in green and the one outlined in blue.
They've said that they're good for a while.
They're good for 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
But the plan does support rezoning for them, and it recommends them being rezoned from R30 to CRT 1.25, C of 0.25, and R of 1.25, and a height of 85 feet. We did receive testimony from the Montgomery Housing Partnership in support of this rezoning. So I'm just going to leave those since we're not really having a large discussion about their redevelopment given the tax credit scenario that they're operating under today. We move on to Rock Creek Woods. The plan recommends rezoning Rock Creek Woods from an R20 zone to CRT 1.25, C.25, R 1.25, and a height of 85 feet to allow redevelopment of higher density residential near the future BRT station. The plan also recommends redevelopment provide a minimum of 15% MPDUs and that 2 and 3 bedroom units be a priority for public benefit points. We did receive testimony from this property owner, the Bullis Tract LLC, in support of the plan's recommended rezoning of the property. The owners emphasized the need to renovate their property due to aging and deteriorating utility infrastructure.
Should we pause on this one then, or?
Well, I was going to kind of cover sort of what the plan recommended for Rock Creek Woods and what the plan recommends for Halpine View, and then have a broader conversation about affordable housing and staff's recommendation, and then get the committee's comments and recommendations. Does that work for the committee? Okay. So if we move on to Halpine View, the plan recommends it be rezoned from R30 to CRT 1.25, C of 0.25, residential of 1.25, and a height of 85, same as Rock Creek Woods. The plan also recommends redevelopment provide a minimum of 15% MPDUs and 5% market affordable units pursuant to a rental agreement with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs for 20 years. Redevelopment must be phased to ensure maintenance and creation of this minimum of 5% affordable units. And the plan also requires that a range in unit sizes must be provided, and at a minimum, 17.5% of all new units must be 2 and 3 bedroom units, which would basically replace the 307 2 and 3 bedroom units in existence today on the Halpine property.
Well, the plan says at a minimum 17% 2 and 3 bedroom.
17.5. Yes.
17.5.
And we received testimony from this property owner or their representative that testified in support of the zoning change and all the associated affordable housing recommendations in the planning board's draft, and including the recommended return of Aspen Hill Road extended to the property owner. That recommendation to pursue that and have the property returned was in the plan draft as well. But the primary issues that we face looking at Rock Creek Woods and Alpine View involve the loss in market affordable housing, loss in 2- and 3-bedroom units for families, and the displacement of residents. You'll see that in the packet or staff report for today, there was tables 1 and 2, which really looked at these properties and looked at the relationship of affordable units, what exists today, what's in the planning board draft. Option 1, which is if you don't change the zoning at all, sort of what scenario would we look at into the future? Option 2, which is what you've seen in the staff report as council staff recommendation. And then option 3 looks at if you had split zoned the Alpine View property, which was an early recommendation from planning staff. For Rock Creek Woods, staff supports the rezoning and the requirement to provide 15% MPDUs and prioritizing the 2- and 3-bedroom units for public benefit points. But staff would also recommend a requirement that in redevelopment, 5% of the units be provided at market affordable rents for 20 years under the agreement with DHCA. And if
Okay,
maybe you'd
so
like to take this up.
I would. Thank you. Appreciate your work on this. I think we'll just dive right into it here. So this is it's a small parcel, but it's nevertheless pretty significant, and it's right at the corner of Veers Mill and Twin Brook. So it's got reasonable access to the metro in one direction and future BRT. It's right there at the corner, and it is a good location. So I think that we all have a concern about the loss of existing affordable housing. So what I have wanted to do here was put in a stipulation that we need to have a no net loss of affordable housing in each of these sites. And I think that we have had enough conversation with the property owner at Alpine View to get a sense of what that might be, but what it might take in terms of density, height, other types of allowances. But I'm not sure if we know that for Rock Creek Woods. So I've been in consultation with the council president. I want to also just recognize her role in this conversation. We talked about this property as well. I think that it would be very helpful to find out what changes might be necessary to make no net loss of affordable realistic there.
I'm going to pull up this table here for the committee. This was a table I added to this staff packet that I hadn't had in the previous to get a sense of, this is sort of the second time, I think, in a master plan, or maybe the third, where the council has been looking at retaining a certain number of units under a rental agreement with DHCA. And the one that was the easiest and maybe one of the first ones done was in Littonsville, so use that as sort of a guide, and then put up the information for Alpine View and Rock Creek Woods so that the committee could see sort of how big are these sites, what is the proposed zoning, if you add a bonus density for 15% MPDUs, what does that look like, what was existing prior to a rezoning, so what's there today. There's a lot of things in play that make it obvious whether something is, a very big burden or possibly, a reasonable burden for a property owner to provide back to the community these rent agreed units. So what you'll see here is for, Alpine View, under the 10% requirement, you get almost, all of the units are retained.
10% MOU, 15% MPDU, 10% MOU.
Those are one on top of the other. They're not, in place of the other. Right. For Rock Creek Woods, the current requirement in the planning staff report is 5%, but if you wanted no net loss, you'd have to actually get to a 6% ask, 26% MOU to retain all their current units, on top of the 15% MPDUs.
You'd have to have 15% MPDU requirement there, and then
Another 26% are rent
if you under this zoning.
under this zoning.
So I think what we want to know is, and we may not, I don't know that we can answer that today. I think we need to have some follow-up here. we need to ask our experts to work with the property owners and come back with a recommendation as to what's necessary to make no net loss viable there. I think we can do that. I think it would be terrific if my colleagues are in agreement, that we just say that that's our goal, that's our intent. And then you'll prepare that, and we may not need to have another committee meeting just to review that, because unless what you come back with is somehow of concern and we feel like we need to talk about it. But it could go with us
You're talking
to,
about Rock Creek,
we're talking about Rock Creek Woods.
And that's it'd be dense, we're talking about what the density was.
Yeah, what the height is, what the density is, what is it gonna take? It may take some significant height. So can you go back to that map, if you would, please? Well, I think it actually is pretty doable. When I look at it, I think that looks like a reasonable place for some height. It's right there at the corner of Veers Mill and Twin Brook, and, it's actually not a bad place for height. So,
Right, I think the key here will be, we already know that they have some site constraints, and there's
Right.
some issues with the twin brooks that are running under that property and the culverts that are required to do that.
those are the Twin Brooks.
Exactly.
They're right. How about
They
that?
are.
of Twin Brook.
So we need to find out from the property owner, so you could, increase the density and increase the height, whether it's viable for them to be able to build that on the site in order to recoup what they'd need to keep the same number of affordable units.
Okay, so I think that we would want to find what that is, and hopefully that's workable. And if not, then I guess we have to figure out what's the if not. And I don't know that we really need to make a decision on what the if not is today, because we're going to be hopeful. But we'll have to decide if we need to come back to the committee or we can just do the if not at the full council. Comments, Council President Navarro. Oh, I'm sorry, my committee members both have, I can't see them.
Yes.
All right, I'll go to Andrew and then Will.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think we should be looking at density in this area to keep market rate affordable. I know it's a shared interest and concern for all of us, so I'm glad we can take a look at that and figure out what it will provide, obviously understanding that there are constraints that exist, both market and environmental in this particular area, but I'd be interested to see what that looks like and what the density could be. I think, with BRT coming to the corridor, I mean, this is an opportunity to both address the market rate affordable replacement and the need for density near transit. I mean, if we're investing the money in to a transit line along this corridor, we ought to have as many people who can access it as possible and ensure that there's as limited displacement as possible. And I just appreciate the hard work that staff has done. I know I've been a bit of a pain in the butt over the last couple of weeks pushing for numbers and taking a look at different options so that we can maximize market rate affordable and have a one-for-one replacement. And thank you to the planning board and Chairman Anderson as well, who's really been helpful with me, and to the property owners who I've had a chance to meet with. And I think everybody shares this interest and concern. And the question is, how do we make the math work? And look forward to coming back with that math and understanding that this is a priority not only of this committee but of the council broadly.
Terrific. Thank you. Will Joindo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that will be very helpful to know, and thank you for all your work on this and seeing how much density we can get to maximize, not only maximize the preservation of affordable housing, but push past it. And I wanted to address Alpine Views.
If we're all in agreement on, I think the council president may have a comment
So-
on Rock Creek Woods.
okay.
So, why don't we?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I really do appreciate the committee's, consensus on coming back. I do believe that this is such a unique, master plan and unique sites. I oftentimes, when we're dealing with these kinds of dilemmas, like to look at the closest school and look at the demographics. And when I pulled up Twin Brook Elementary School, it's 86% children of color. And the ever farmed rates is 75.6%. And so when we talk about displacement, it's pretty real for families who don't have the resources to be able to, quickly find alternative housing. And so this is one of those very interesting moments when policymakers have to wrestle with the opportunity to provide, redevelopment, but at the same time really arrest this issue of displacement. And as you were saying, Councilmember Friedson, we are also investing through the BRT line. We're paying close attention to this issue of Vision Zero. I think we're going to be making a significant investment. So I think that we can do both. I think that the market will be there to support these market rate units because people would want to live close to transit, and at the same time preserve those goals of not displacing people who are very much members of this vibrant county. So I really do look forward to whatever can be explored. I agree that I think more density, if possible, within the site, but definitely height, it should not be an issue in that particular corridor. I'm glad to entertain that, and really also, I appreciate everybody's hard work on this particular site. Very critical, I think, opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to just say, I think that the focus on racial equity and displacement pushes us to think about things a little differently.
Correct.
And it's not just that, it pushes us to say, what is it going to take? And I think that's a little bit, I think it emboldens us to maybe be more, to reach a little further than we might normally reach. So I thank you for that. Okay, so I think we have consensus on Rock Creek Woods, and now we will tee up Alpine View before I turn it to Councilmember Joando. So we met with the property owners several weeks ago. They expressed their support for the plan, their strong concern about this dedication of this right-of-way issue, but their general support for the plan. I expressed to them that I wasn't really satisfied. I thought we ought to do no net loss. I wanted to hear from them about what it would take. Councilmember Friedson, I think, has been having a similar dialogue, and the council staff has done a great job, and planning has done a great job to, and I know Councilmember Joando as well, to figure out what is that going to take. So today we're going to hear more about what's involved in a no net loss. The property owners have been I will say I wasn't sure that they were going to think that that was possible or that there was a way forward. And I was comfortable saying, well, if the answer to that is that we can't do anything, then I think not doing anything is an also acceptable outcome for some time. I don't think it's a long-term outcome, but I think it's a acceptable outcome for at least some time. But I'm really pleased to hear that they have really crunched this and worked it through, and they've come up with what they think is a viable approach. So can we hear about that a little bit? What it would take? What are we talking about in terms of the properties? Do you have any information about the no net loss? What it would mean? What are the implications?
So go to this slide here. This is, again, it looks at how much zoning capacity is there for Alpine View. What's the size of the property, the bonus density, how many units do you get under sort of the maximum yield of density and under zoning, which is the 2,099. You get 333 MPDUs. And if you put into place the 10% requirement, then you would be at like 96% of retained units. If you say, okay, we really want to retain all of them, what that looks like to the property owner is putting down a rental agreement on 11% of their ultimate yield. The reality with this whole looking at this chart and how I did it is it looks at basically the maximum zoning yield and says there's a standard unit size that we apply to something like that, and we get the maximum yield. So you get these results when the developer goes ahead and builds 100% of what we're looking at here. And they build unit sizes that are on average the size that we've analyzed. If they build units that are smaller on average because they make it work on their site, they're going to build possibly even more units or not. So if what I'm hearing the committee say is that they want to see that there is a retention of all the existing market rate affordable units today in redevelopment, it's probably language in the code that goes in there to say that rather than like a percentage, but you could do both. You could say the goal is 10%, but depending on whatever happens, if you build smaller units and therefore there are more units, 10% may be above what we are required to keep, to give back to the community what's there today. So it could be 10% or no net loss, or 10% or,
I mean, generally, I think it's no net loss that we really just want to focus on, because that's the broadest umbrella, and then we're not negotiating against ourselves if there's disagreements about how provisions work and how they interact and things like that. But I want to ask about the family-size units, and how does that factor into
right.
this?
So that is a second table that I had, it was actually table 3 in this report, that the planning board drafted said 17.5% of the 2 and 3 bedrooms should be retained, meaning that all 307 currently there today are retained. When I looked at, it's in the staff report in general, looking at the market, and actually I got planning staff's help for this. The housing planner pulled data for me. She looked at what does it look like when the county has, it looked at CoStar data, it's on page 5 of the report, and looked at how many studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedroom units do we get in general in apartment complexes in the county. And then, we know that there are complexes that don't provide any 3 or 4 bedrooms. They provide only studios in 1s and 2s. So we just looked at the universe of the ones that provide the larger units. Requiring 17.5% of the units as 2 and 3 bedroom is pretty small. We know that on average, the county's already getting some sort of that in return. And if we want to ensure that, because we know we do get complexes where there's very little of those units or none, sort of a mix, then let's put that in the report. And so there's a requirement to say 20% of the units come back as 2 bedroom and 5% as 3 bedroom. And what you'll see is you get a net gain of, if they go to the zoning envelope and all that, of 218 2-bedroom units as a net gain.
Okay, so planning board, we see your 17.5%, and we up you.
Yeah.
This
Don't
is the
throw us
chart
in the
on
briar
circle
patch,
3, by the way. This is on circle 3, the numbers that,
Circle 3? Okay. Okay, so what language do we need then in order to
There
make
is
that statement?
language in the plan that's also on page 5 that is the recommendation, and it basically says,
Is-
to find it now. Council staff recommends that with redevelopment, a minimum
Okay.
of 20% of the units be provided as 2-bedroom units and 5% of the units be provided as 3-bedroom units.
And that's the same whether it's no net loss or under your staff recommendation?
Correct.
Okay, that's kind of the thing I wanted to hone in on.
Yeah, it
is whether
doesn't-
that needed to be adjusted, because we have a different recommendation than your staff recommendation. Got it. Okay, good. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, staff, for the helpful charts and explanations. A couple things, when I ran for this office, we all talked about it, but I talked about in particular the importance of not only preserving affordable housing, but expanding affordable housing. We all talked about that, the planning boards talked about that. We know there's a desperate need for that, and also what the definition of affordable is, in that, whether it's 60, 65% of AMI, 80% at market rate affordable, those definitions really are a part of the affordable housing landscape, but there's also another group, right, that the lower than 60 or 65% of AMI, the 55, the 50, the 45, the 40, those folks. And this area in particular, Councilmember Navarro kind of alluded to this in her numbers, but there's, according to county stat, 45% of the households, so just under half, in this area have an income slightly over $50,000 annually for a family of 4. And equally as important, about half of them are paying over 30% of their income on housing. So that means they're rent burdened, they're housing burdened. And the concern that I have, while I think we've taken a great leap forward from what the plan initially approved to what's before us now in the council staff recommendation, is that, could you go
It's
back?
not the council staff recommendation, it's the committee recommendation. What we've just discussed is the committee's recommendation.
I'm sorry,
not
but now the
staff.
council, we will get to the council staff, yes, thank you.
That's right.
Which one did you want?
Yeah, this is perfect, unless you have a bigger map, but if this, yeah, okay. Yeah, I know, I want the whole screen. If you go to this, in the numbers we're talking about under the various options, the bit of county-owned land that we have, and I'm excited I get to use my pointer for the first time. I had him bring it down from up from the third floor.
Well, you get a millennial on the
Yeah,
committee.
exactly. You get excited. So it's the small things in life I learned. So this is the Aspen Hill Road Extended, which the county owns, which was conveyed, many years ago, given by the property owners to build the road, which is no longer in the plans. This is the HOC property. One of the things that I am interested in exploring, because of this concern for no net loss is great, but we need more affordable housing. And when you're talking about going from 564 units to 2,099 units, that's basically times 4, right? I would like to explore, you have the ability of a county-owned land here. You have county-owned land. You have an HOC property right here adjacent. Can we look at exploring this division here? This is about 2 acres. Can we look at cutting off that 0.75, or the number might be a little less than that, and working with HOC to expand what would get some of those people who are not, many who live in this area, who are at that 50 and 60 and even below % of AMI who need housing. And no net loss is good, but when we're going to times 4, 2,100 units over 15 to 20 years if they build out. And to have no net loss, to only retain what we had when we had 564, and I realize that there's no current restrictions and a property owner could do what they need to do if they wanted to under their own auspices to tear it down or upgrade. But I think if county land's involved, unlike Rock Creek Woods, we are giving this land back in exchange.
Selling it back.
Selling it back, yeah. In exchange for the no net loss. I think that we should look into this. I've spoken to Director Span at HOC. They are interested in exploring that. It's contiguous, it's right there. And I would like to just ask that we look into that between now and full council. I am just so for the benefit of the property owners and others that are here, I think the overall plan to give the rest of this, convey the rest of it and back, and to do what we're doing with the rest of the property and expansion, I think is still a great idea. But I think this is a unique opportunity where we have literally a property right there that gets the population that doesn't have access to expand. So I would like to see us explore that and see what the planning board or anyone wants to say about that option.
Well, I think that's a good suggestion that we'd not considered. Nobody had brought that forward before. I'd just suggest that another variation on that idea is that in some plans, including Bethesda, for example, and Chevy Chase Lake, there have been partnerships between HOC and an abutting property owner. So and perhaps the plan language, I think this needs some more exploration with both HOC and the property owner, but there may be other ways to slice this up as far as who owns what piece of land and who's going to take on what obligation to develop the parcel that has the extraordinary number of affordable units.
Yeah, and I agree 100%, and thank you for that clarification. And I think that's right. I'm agnostic on whether it's a partnership or just a totally separate project. I think I mentioned to the property owners and their representation earlier today, would they be interested in a partnership? And I wasn't told flatly no, but I was, yeah, okay, well, now I'm told no. And, but then that might make my route the route to go. But I think that's something we have to take advantage of county-owned land to get to this need to, in this area where over half the people are not making anywhere near what, they're not gonna be able to rent an apartment in this place. And we have to expand these units, and we have so few opportunities where we own land like this, again, contiguous to an HOC property. And I just think we really, really need to look at that. So I would ask that the committee maybe, I know that we're gonna do whatever today. I would like to just park that part between now and full session so we can dig into it a little more and see what's possible. That would be my request.
All right. Well, it's hard to take this up, frankly, without bringing the property owner up, and then we're going to get into a lot of conversation that I don't know that is really appropriate for the moment. My initial reaction is, the vision here is that we're providing this land back into this deal in order to facilitate the creation of a lot more affordable housing. And that this land is part of a deal that we are brokering with the property owner. And so if they don't have access to that, then it has a real consequence in the overall deal for Alpine View. And that could be problematic. Secondly, I do want to observe that one thing we know, we've learned through our careful reviews of NPDU policy is that NPDUs are often accessed by organizations that control them and then make them available to individuals with lower incomes. And so the concern that NPDU at 65% of AMI is not your 30% AMI resident is an important point, but we have nonprofits. HOC could potentially, get access to many of these units, and that's another thing that could be potentially discussed, so that HOC tenants can be, in the mix with those. And in fact, that could be part of the MOU conversation. I mean, DHCA in our formulation here has to sign a deal with the property owner to make all this possible, and so there's a lot there. There's a lot of deal making that has yet to even really unfold as far as what is in there. So there's some possibilities there. Personally, I'd have a lot of concern about, changing, changing a deal. And, the property owner has been very intent on their need for this land. I think HOC can probably be sympathetic with the idea of someone else coming along and asking for some of their property. That's something we've heard a little bit about recently, but that's another comment for another day. I haven't heard from HOC on this issue, frankly. Anyway, so right now I'm happy to, if you want to keep talking to people and see what you can put together, I'd love to know more. But my initial reaction is that this land is part of a deal that is a very substantial deal. And we ought to stick to that deal, but,
I'd like to respond.
sure.
Yeah, quickly.
Wait, let me go,
go ahead.
let me go to Andrew. He was in
Yes,
queue.
sir.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate the comments from Chairman Reamer. Appreciate the desire, which I think we all share. I think the question is, how do we get there, and at what point does it become not market, not a market reality? And while I appreciate the creativity and the thought process, I don't think we should go in that route. I think part of the reason why the MPDU program works is because it uses private sector investment and the quality of private sector quality to provide affordable housing. And, I do agree with Chairman Reamer that to get below the MPDU program, there are ways to buy down those costs, and I think that's critically important, but I think that's a different function. The MPDU function is a very specific function, and we get that by not having to invest taxpayer dollars, allowing to basically, it's not the developer who's subsidizing these units, it's the other owners or renters of a development who are subsidizing their neighbors to be able to access the same high-quality communities. And I am particularly concerned about the message that we're sending, that if you work with us, if you try to do one-for-one replacement, if you you sit down at the table and you are willing to make those types of commitments, that nothing will be good enough for us, and that one-for-one isn't enough. And that, to me, sends a concerning message, particularly in an area where I think we desperately need private sector investment. We desperately need to make this a community that has even more amenities, that has even more quality housing options, and ensures that we aren't displacing folks. So I think taking something that the county obtained for free, that was dedicated, we paid $0 for it, leveraging that into additional affordable housing is exactly the type of thing that we should be doing. I think having the council and the planning staff and our staff work with property owners to pursue these goals of ensuring one-for-one replacement is something that I hope we can do more of. And I would hate for us to not just pick as much fruit as we can off the plant, but to literally pull the roots out from under the ground, because I think despite the good intentions that we may have, I think that we run the risk of freezing the private sector investment that we need to get to the type of quality replacement. And if nothing happens here, even if there is a right for that to happen here in terms of new zoning, then we don't get anything in terms of what our interests are in ensuring affordable housing, which the MPDU program does and has done incredibly successfully. So I'm less interested in pursuing it. I think that we should take the one-for-one replacement, which is something that is not a common situation that we do. I think this calls for it. I am very happy with the fact that we can get to one-for-one replacement. We are leveraging something that the taxpayers paid $0 for, and we're getting significant affordable housing out of it. That's a good deal. We're getting a commitment from the property owners, and ultimately, what we require only takes it so far. The market is going to have to dictate where the money comes from, and at some point the math doesn't work, and at some point we've pushed so far that we've undermined our shared goal here, which is to maximize affordable housing and to ensure one-for-one replacement. So I'm comfortable sticking to what we discussed before with the other property, which is one-for-one replacement, to make sure that we are maximizing our affordable housing, but not doing so in a way that sends a chilling message to private sector investment in this area and any area of the county, that if you work with us for affordable housing, that we will continue pushing until there's nothing left to push.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Friedson. I think there's a few very different things in here that make this a unique proposal. And
Sorry, I can't see it. Apologize.
okay, yeah, sorry, a unique proposal and different from another property where we're looking for one-to-one replacement. I actually think in the Rock Creek Woods example, for example, it's a lot more difficult to get one-to-one. And I would actually be more, the planning board's nodding, want to be more lenient there potentially, because they're a small family-owned place. It's in worse condition. Gwen, if you want to comment on that?
Well, they have a lot of infrastructure issues too, whereby they've got to deal with the piping under the buildings. The one thing I would say again about Rock Creek Woods, I know that this is what's most difficult, but each of these properties is a case-by-case scenario. I was doing some just quick jotting on Rock Creek Woods, and I think you'd have to go up to close to 2 FAR to even begin to get to the one-for-one replacement. But that begins assuming a building type, given how much land they have, of a high-rise construction with concrete, not the stick-over podium that many people are doing, that may not be marketable in this particular part of the county. That works in certain areas that are very close to transit and that are, more like our central business districts. But in these areas that are, our new suburban areas, it's harder to create a market for taller concrete buildings. Even if you give the height, even if you give the FAR, it may not be what the market is calling for. So I think, again, it's hard. Each of these is a very, very individual case. And we're doing a lot of detailed work on things that will go through a regulatory review process. I know in the case of Alpine View, they said this is a long-term build-out. It's something that they would build out over 10, 15 years or more. It's not going to be a total redevelopment all at one time. I think for a plan, the key thing for the council to do is to set policy goals, to say we want to aim for one-to-one replacement. And that's what you as a property owner, that's your challenge to work out as you go through the regulatory process. We want to encourage, strongly encourage, partnerships with either MHP or HOC. There are two groups here. And put those policy goals in the plan, but not necessarily pin everything down so tightly that, we're sort of saying there's going to be a regulatory case a week after this plan comes out that will reflect all of this. There may not be a regulatory case on this for a couple of years.
A decade.
Or a decade. I mean, we don't know. And we need to make sure that the plan doesn't have so much detail in it that when we do get to the point of actually reviewing a regulatory case, our hands are tied.
Yeah.
We've done that in the past in some plans, and it actually becomes problematic.
Well, I appreciate the comment, and you bring up an interesting point, but I was pointing that out to say that one size doesn't fit all, and the circumstances are different in different properties. And when you have, again, I'm gonna use my pointer as many times as I can. When you have a affordable housing, and then you have MHP down here too, but the one contiguous to this land, again, the plan recommends, and correct me if I'm wrong, planning staff, to have this land be returned, and use the proper word. I think we owe it, whether it was given to us 50, 60 years ago when it didn't cost that much and it was farmland, or much less densely populated. I think we owe it to taxpayers to maximize that. Again, I'm not arguing about this part. I think that, that should go back and could be factored in. And I still think with these numbers, you're talking about a pretty good 15 to 20 year, whatever, with the desirability and what the rents are currently doing, 11, 13, 1,500 for three or more in that area. I think the owners are going to be fine. I know we don't, and we have to maximize and encourage these partnerships. So I'm fine using that language, but I think because we own this land, I think we need to be much more directive with how that is disposed of.
And I agree that, honestly, we'd have to run the numbers, we'd have to talk to the property owner. You're not talking, I think that whole strip is about
2 acres.
2 acres. You're only talking about the front portion of it, which would probably be like, 0.5, 0.7 acres, and connecting that with the HOC property. That would change the numbers a bit, but it might not be something that completely blows the whole plan up. And, we could certainly run those numbers, but I think there is a logic to including, again, that section of publicly owned land with the HOC so that they can, when they expand.
When they're ready, yeah.
May not be for 10 years, may not be for a while because they have affordable housing tax credits, that they could do a bigger project.
And again, to my colleagues, I know we have the same goals, but I just think when you have the opportunity to do not only no net loss, that's great, but we're talking about adding and expanding here and to a different group that's not currently covered. Yes.
Something that just dawned on me, if you wanted to keep the numbers the same, if you are interested in not changing sort of what we've been reviewing, you could leave the language that so the size of the property is 1.9 acres, and the agreement, that the property owner is interested in is that be returned for providing 30% MPDUs for a 40% density bonus on that 1.9 acres. You could still have that all there, but just add that the portion that is adjacent to or abuts HOC would then be retained and available to HOC to develop on even more affordable housing, so that you're not actually changing the numbers.
Okay.
You're just, but then allowing the portion adjacent to HOC to develop. It's almost like you're
So it
counting
would
it
just be a
twice, but
higher
you're doing it
density
for
bonus kind of thing, or.
You're basically allowing them to take the density off of it and the bonus for that,
Right, and just keep it over in that section.
but keep it on their section, and then you're
That's
allowing
something to
that.
consider. I just,
same piece
I
to
think
go to
we have
HOC.
the planning board, and I'll yield to the council president who's been waiting patiently. The planning board think it's a good idea. HOC.
no one said it was a good
Well,
idea.
let me, they can speak for themselves. I mean, I heard good idea twice, but if they can contradict me, and I'd be happy to have them do that. I've spoken to the director of HOC who's interested in it. at this point, I don't know why we would want to get in the way of expanding potentially affordable housing to a bracket of people who can't currently get it in a place that's contiguous to an HOC property. So with that, I'll yield.
Well, just to be clear, I mean, I think that I can see a pathway, and I think what Ms. Dunn just said is one, again, it's just another permutation of a bunch of things we're talking about, but that you can encourage the Alpine View folks to work with HOC or MHP to try to collectively achieve this goal. It may turn out that it's advantageous for them to have HOC or MHP take on a piece of those, a chunk of that obligation, and they may be able to deliver a project that's whatever, 40% plus affordable with a relatively smaller portion of market rate units, and that would not screw up the deal that has been arranged. But I think that this is looking a lot like some of these other plans that we've done, where there has been sort of this confluence of interest that the budding market rate developer finds that it makes sense for them to work with the affordable housing entity, and everybody can come out ahead. I do think there's some urgency to figuring out how Alpine View can redevelop, not because the buildings are falling down, but to the contrary, they're getting per square foot rents that are basically the same as the new construction just up the block, which indicates that if they don't redevelop, there's no protection against, and these buildings are in a position to compete with the newer market rate construction. So that's the other thing I think that's just been weighing on all our minds is we don't want to encourage displacement, but we also recognize that if we don't allow some opportunity to redevelop, we may see these prices rise with the market.
Thank you.
Council President.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we are all on the same page that we want to leverage public land, public property whenever possible. This is just a very unique, I think, circumstance where that public, land, that road, it's helping us leverage an opportunity for no net loss of existing market affordable housing. So in a way, it's great that we can leverage that, but it's not as if it is standing alone where we can say, oh, we have this opportunity, therefore let's maximize it. And my primary concern is that I really don't want to see the net loss issue. That is my primary concern. We are talking about private property where they've come to the table in good faith and said, I think that we can work with this set of ingredients. That road has made it possible for that collaboration. And so that would be my priority. That is not to say that, of course, we don't want to maximize whatever we can, but sometimes we also have to be realistic because we are dealing with private property. And as you just said, without doing anything, it can very well compete. Absolutely. So, I just want to ensure that we're not, trying to push the envelope so far, then we end up in a position where inadvertently we've lost the opportunity for at least having the replacement of what's existing there. So that would be my only caveat. I mean, I think that everybody has been working for quite a while and has come up with this arrangement. They looked at the numbers. It has worked. I mean, I think that we also cannot convey land in the master plan, I believe, right? We have to dispose of that. But everybody has come to the table in good faith and said, hey, this is what we can do. And I just want to make sure that also we're not affecting, that balance and that agreement, I guess, that everybody has come up to the table, to do. So, I mean, that would just be my observation. As I said before, we have the opportunity at the recreation property up, Bushy, I think it's a Bushy Drive, is that right? Sure, let's push the envelope wherever we can, but to kind of blow up the agreement and then risk not having the one-to-one replacement, I think it would be a mistake.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I think the council president said it better than I could, so I won't repeat what was said, but I share those same thoughts and have the same feelings of ultimately we require the private sector to come forward and redevelop, and if we freeze that redevelopment, we end up with nothing. And nothing is far worse than one-for-one replacement. 100% is pretty good, and is something that is not a common outcome, and so I just don't want to lose that. The only one other aspect of this is it's not as if HOC would be redeveloping immediately. At best, HOC would be redeveloping at the end of their life cycle of their tax credits, which the earliest possible moment they could even think about beginning to redevelop, from my understanding, is about 15 years, which is the end of the life cycle, most likely, of what we hope the private property owner would be doing. And so, in the interest of squeezing out a little bit more of a deal that I think is a really good one, we'd be delaying affordable housing that we'd be getting. A far better outcome would be, as mentioned before, some of the other programs to, subsidize the MPDUs to get them below the 60% number in some way, which I think is something that we should be pursuing and is something that is interesting. And, as I said before, I think that this has broader ramifications than just this one property owner. I think this has a larger message that we send of, if you come to the table, if you try to help us with affordable housing, if you share our commitment and you're willing to put in some of your own money, a significant amount, by the way, of your own money, that we will continue pushing until you're no longer standing. And I just don't think that that's the right message that we should be sending. We should be awarding and celebrating and championing those who come to the table and are willing to negotiate and are willing to help us reach these goals. We shouldn't be penalizing them for being willing to sit down and come to an agreement and help us solve these challenges.
Thank you again. This is a great discussion. I really, penalizing and blowing up and some of the words that are being used to describe this, by my colleagues, I think are a little overblown. We're talking about, again, because I'm going to use my pointer one more time, keep maintaining 1.5 of, or 1.4, the planning staff could get back, of the property to be developed when at whatever time period they see fit. I mean, the idea that we're slowing everything down and not giving, I think those are just not accurate statements. I also would want to double check with HOC. My understanding from a conversation I had with Director Span today was not that it would be 15 years, but we could check that. But even if it was, I still think preserving that with the opportunity for expanding on that small piece would be great. And, I just again want to say the deal is to allow and facilitate. We're still would be disposing of and allowing the opportunity for 1.5 acres to be given that's contiguous to do the redevelopment. And so what are we trying to weigh here is my question. I'm almost done. I think we really need to think about the best use of this county land, and I don't see it as blowing up a deal. I think it's a negotiation, as Director Anderson said. It might actually benefit if there was a partnership, which I think would be a great idea. All I'm asking for is us to consider, before we say no, which I'm hearing a lot of no, is that we look into it, kick the tires, and consider it. I think it's worth, because once we give it over, that's it.
All right. I guess part of my concern is this plan has been under development for 2 years. HOC has never once raised their hand to say, there's county-owned property, which it is owned by the county presently, right next door to us, and we would like to do something there. So it's hard from a procedural perspective to suddenly now at this moment, and they're not even here. Like, if they want this, you'd think they would be here, to know what we're really talking about. Secondly, I'm not totally convinced that doing that would result in more affordable housing. Like, I'm not so sure, it might be that what they would do with it wouldn't be any different than what is gonna happen under our proposal. There's an assumption that it would result in more, but we don't know, because we don't actually know what they're talking about. So, you certainly may continue to talk with him and develop this,
appreciate
and
it.
perhaps there's, but I don't think you're hearing a lot of enthusiasm here, other than for your support for affordable housing.
So I want to make sure that I'm clear on what the council's action would be. The master plan simply zones a piece of property.
Right.
And it would zone the property in, a certain way, 1.25, whatever the correct C and the correct RR. Are you suggesting that you would want language in the plan that would say when and if this piece of land is disposed of, it should be disposed of to the Halpine View property owner?
Well, I think that's
Because
what
there's
we did
another regulatory action
Correct.
that the council will need to take at some point about the disposition of that strip of
Let's review
land.
that issue. What is in the plan? I think that is what we've been talking about, because the property owner has been very, very concerned that this property should be returned to them in order to do this development. That has been like their primary objective in their conversations with me is, this is really important. We need this. This is really important. That's what I've heard from them. And so
Right, if you'll,
that was a very specific request, that we have that language in the plan.
there has been a specific request, and in addition to that, and really, it pivoted off of the fact that in the planning board's draft on page 100, a whole column is devoted to talking about the history of Halpine View and Aspen Hill Road Extended, and that in prior master plans, it had been recommended to be returned to the property. This master plan was recommending the same thing, consistent with prior master plans. It doesn't say how it's returned, but it is saying it returns to the property owner. Subsequent to the planning board's draft coming to council, we received correspondence, and in the testimony given at the public hearing that was held in the community, the representative for the property owner spoke to this issue and said, we really want the disposition of the land back to us, and in exchange for that, we will provide more affordable housing, so 30% affordable housing, and then they do get a density bonus off of that. So that's where this has evolved to.
Okay?
Yeah. Thank you, Pam. And just to be clear, so that was, that offer, the request for the land back and the offer of the 30% was initiated by the property owner.
Correct.
And that was the first salvo of, it was the first offer, the 30%, where we're sitting today,
Correct.
correct? And I'm, well, a little bit, teeny bit. My point there being the initial offer, yes, we'd like the land and we'll give you this for it. While I think much light years better than where we were when we took the bus tour and we were talking about 5%, and under the current planning board plan, I think it's much, much better. I want to acknowledge that, and I thank the property owners. I thank everyone's work for that. I'm not the best deal maker in the world, but the first offer generally is an opening offer. And I know I'm not asking you to answer this, Pam. I'm just saying, I just want to be
clear too, that that's the first I've heard of it, so I don't know if there were prior conversations.
Right, and yeah, I'm just asking your information. The first I've heard of it too. I would think that it would be normal and okay to say, hey, okay, well, what about this? And how about this? And how about that? Well, I didn't do that.
Okay.
And I'm on this committee, and I've been here, and this is my first conversation on this topic, because I was at a funeral when we first broached
Did you have a chance to meet with the property owners on this one?
I met with them today. So I just want to just put that on the record, that when someone comes to you and says, hey, here's what we're willing to do, that's a great start, but I think there's room for additional negotiation.
Absolutely. Agree with you. You're going to be a great member of this committee. I think that's what the public needs, is people who are willing to drive a hard bargain. My feeling is, I feel that we've done that in this case. We've said to the property owner, the number of affordable units you're talking about is not nearly enough. We are asking for another 100 or something like that. I don't know what the number is. Pam, what's the number? The difference between no net loss and what the planning board had recommended in terms of number of affordable units?
That's on that chart. 60 or so.
60 units?
Yeah, not much.
That's a big, that's a whole building. That's a
We're talking about
lot.
2,100 units, though.
I mean, I also, well, I don't know. I think it's a lot.
Or maybe a little.
No, 60 unit, it's more than 60.
If you look at the MPDU.
What's the number?
Circle one,
I thought it was,
10% just
I
on.
thought it was over
just
100.
on the,
MOU. It's-
on the 10%, it's 543, instead of the 373 that would have resulted from
100
Looking at the
and,
MPDU number.
543 to 373, that's 100 and,
PDUs
30.
and the requirement for the rental agreement.
Right, the 80%. I was just looking at the MPDU number, which is closer to the 60.
370.
Right,
What's the number?
The MPDUs was 333.
Previously,
Can we do this?
282.
Can we do the math here?
So the difference between option two, MPDUs plus market affordable in the plan, and the option two from the council staff is 167 units.
167 units. That's the difference between no net loss and,
Oh,
No, it's not. That's
No.
not fair to say it that way.
it's the package,
Can I ask
package
a thing?
deal.
But isn't the, we're operating on the assumption that the ones that are there right now are just market affordable, which, as you were describing, could definitely compete. So in reality, we are creating the entire, regulated affordable housing. So, I mean, it's a very different situation. And then with regards to land disposition, it's my understanding that the executive also agrees with the current agree with the agreement of this, using this road under these circumstances. So when it comes to the disposition law and that process, the executive sends over the disposition, correct? And then if the council is also in agreement with the characterization of this deal, then that is how it happens. And so to have the county executive plus the council on the same page pretty much facilitates the fact that this is the deal that we want. And what we are doing is that we are creating 500 whatever regulated, pretty much, affordable units that wouldn't otherwise be there.
Zero now. That's a very important point.
And I was really just asking for a technical, because we're going to have to give you language. And right now on page 100, it says, consistent with the previous master plans, the Veers Mill Corridor Master Plan continues to support the abandonment of Aspen Hill Road extension to further facilitate the synergistic redevelopment of Howpine View, Parkway Woods, and Howpine Hamlet.
That's in the draft
Those
plan, but I
are-
think that we were looking
right,
for
and
additional
so-
language.
And that's what I'm trying to get clarity on, is that you want to change, or maybe not the majority of the Fed committee, but at least some of the Fed committee members want to change that language. I'm just trying to get clarification of what I
The
need to.
majority of the committee actually does want to change that language to be more specific,
what
that
I'm
it should go
saying.
to Alpine View.
And we'll have,
Okay.
given the importance
Right.
of this property, we'll have that for you by the full council session, so you can see the specific
council president
language
should have
and
too.
any alternatives you might want.
Okay, so I'll pass it to you in just a second. So I think the council president's point there is really important. There are no regulated units on this property today. We are creating, what's the total that will be created under this deal if we succeed? 543 regulated units under well, we don't know what the terms are of the 10%, but theoretically, 99 years. So we are,
No, not for the others, but.
well, we don't know what the terms of the MOU units would be.
Typically for Littonsville, it was 20 years.
Okay, 20 years. That's important. So 15% would be 99 years. Potentially, 10% is 20 years, but we don't know. That's,
HOC tax credit.
okay, I've talked myself out. Will?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is what I'm talking about, this is democracy in action.
There you go.
So just, Gwen, on your point you were just making, the synergistic included the HOC property?
Again, that's what the language.
That's what's in the draft plan. Okay,
said.
got it.
And the MHP property as well. It said, look at this holistic, but I'm hearing that that is language that at least the majority of the Fed committee wants changed.
I just would like it to be noted, if that is the way we vote on it or whatever we need to do, but I think synergistic is the way to go. That wouldn't exclude the action that the committee, the majority seems to want to take and just go with the current deal. I think that could still happen under the current language. Is that correct?
I think that again,
Yeah,
you are correct that as it is written, theoretically, HOC could put in an offer And I'm not sure that they can't put in an offer even with the language that we're putting in there. It's just that the master plan calls for
Right.
Alpine View. In order for it to be disposed, it has to go through a disposition process. And in fact, what we're informed is that HOC would have the opportunity to put in an offer because they are a county agency and they are allowed to respond to any disposition.
Right.
Now, you know, I don't know what that means really when the master plan, if the master plan says, in the master plan, it should go to Alpine, it might mean that the county executive would
It
say,
adds
you
some
know.
weight.
It adds weight, exactly.
You
That's
all,
probably-
again, just going back, the master plan is a policy document. It's
Sure.
for you to explain what your vision, your policy is, not to completely lay out a particular agreement
Right.
at the time of the master plan. So I think it's important to keep some level of,
Yeah. Well, and I would just say that I think the flexibility to have the synergistic approach language is important. And I also want to acknowledge, I think it is a great opportunity to go from unregulated units completely, which are a little higher, you know, or around, but a little higher than market rate, you know, than what an MPDU would be, whether it's the 65 or 80%. And the opportunity to lock that in is a great opportunity, and we want to take advantage of that. And I'm just trying to, again, see if we can do a little more there for more people. And so I appreciate the dialogue, and I think, Pam, you're clear on where I am. If not, we can.
Yes, I'm going to draft up language that covers both the majority committee and Councilmember Jawando's views on this, and then I will pass it to you to see, so that you can have it before full council and make sure you're comfortable with what will be presented.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Very good. All right. I think, let's continue through the packet. Is there,
So I think I'm clear then on what the committee's feelings, the only real place where, from what's in the staff report, the committee's feelings on the recommendation to the council on this has to do with the Aspen Hill Road extended piece, and the clarity that there is no net loss of affordable units in redevelopment, those two pieces. So I'll make sure that's clarified. So now we'd move off of the land use part of it is regards to redevelopment and housing, and move into parks, trails, and open space. Starts, I think, on page 80. Well, there's some general language for parks, trails, and open space, and then within each of the district, there's more specific recommendations related to these topics. One of the overriding views of the plan is that the area is fairly well-served by parks, trails, and open space. There is a corridor-wide recommendation for improved wayfinding for the existing and future amenities. So there is some thought that while there are a lot of amenities in the area, maybe the community or someone passing through the community doesn't always know where they exist. The community would like to see in the future a central civic green. And then in specifics in the Connecticut Randolph District, the plan recommends open space requirements for each of the commercial centers, Veers Mill, at Veers Mill and Randolph, and the staff is comfortable for those recommendations. Happy to go through each one of those individual recommendations with the committee if they'd like, or we can just talk about this more broadly. They're just recommendations on size of open space for each of the commercial properties.
Yeah, I don't necessarily need to go into each one, but the one particular recommendation about rather than combining, but to parse out the recommendations for each site, I think it's something that is of interest, and I think would be helpful to provide policy guidance for
Okay,
that.
so that's, that's when we get to Twin Brook, because that has to do with the properties in Twin Brook. Before I do that, though, in the Robindale District, there was one recommendation for Park-Lawn Local Park to be improved, and again, staff would support that if the committee's so agreeable. In the Twin,
No objection.
okay. In the Twin Brook District, though, the plan does recommend it's a combined 4.5 acre open space. It says combined for Halpine View, Parkway Woods, and Halpine Hamlet, although there's no guarantee that these properties will, in fact, redevelop either at the same time or together. And then I think the goal was to try to get certain size open space. So staff did have a recommendation for each one of the properties based on their relative size. So if the overall was 4.5 acres and Halpine View is 10 acres, or Halpine Hamlet's 10 acres, how much of that 4.5 should be attributed there, and that was the recommendation.
Yeah, I'm interested in parsing it out. I think it's important that these are going to be developed at different times. They should be viewed as such in terms of our policy guidance. And I was just interested from the planning board and planning staff if there was a view on that recommendation and whether or not the staff recommendations seemed appropriate for each of the sites.
Really nice to be laid out every now and then. My name is Luis Estrada. I'm an urban designer with the planning department. And typically what we do when we make the recommendations for open space in any of the properties that we think have potential for redevelopment, we based it on the minimum requirement that is built into the CR zones and zoning ordinance. Basically, there's a minimum 10% requirement. And what we try to do is to ensure that when that open space is delivered as consolidated as possible so that the public can get a maximum use of the open space that has been delivered. When we looked at the Alpine properties, we encourage synergistic redevelopment, so we calculated the total, assuming that there is a potential for all the properties to enter into some kind of a partnership and which could deliver a larger, more substantial public open space. But we could parse it out, entertaining the potential that each one of the properties may develop independently.
Okay, so we can have a both and kind of.
Yeah, can we do a hybrid with parsing out the policy recommendation, but with an interest in creating the largest central civic space as practical, or something along those lines that would, hope for that. But I think the reality is we can't dictate based on our interest in that whether or not the development will happen that way. So I think it'd be helpful if we're providing not directive policy guidance, but at least specific policy guidance, so it's clear to planning staff as it reviews, throughout the process from the property owner, it understands that, we're moving forward in the way that we had envisioned through the master plan process.
Yes, we would recommend consolidation even if we were going to make a recommendation for individual properties, because we believe that that's a worthy goal to be pursued regardless of the size of the property. So yes, we could do sort of what you refer to as a hybrid recommendation so that we can sort of entertain it both ways.
Well, you would recommend consolidation, but if the properties don't develop.
Well, when I talk about consolidation is that when a redevelopment comes in, even if it's an individual property, there are a number of different ways in which they entertain delivering the public open space requirement that is built into the zoning ordinance, and in many situations, even as an individual property, that open space is not delivered in one location. It's broken down throughout the single property, and it results in pockets of space that are delivered to meet that open space requirement, but in our view are not as usable as they could be if they were consolidated. So for an individual property, say that if it's exclusively the Alpine properties exclusive of MHP and HOC, we would recommend as much consolidation of the open space delivered to meet the public open space.
Yeah, I mean, I think I share that goal, and I don't think that's mutually exclusive of what the council staff was recommending. I think that what the council staff was saying is we can't control different parcels and different properties, which develops at which time. Within each property and amongst all the properties, there is a broad policy guidance and interest in consolidation to ensure the largest, greatest benefit to the community for central civic greens. And I think, not dictating what that is, but determining what is an appropriate amount per property based on size and natural limitations, I think is appropriate in zoning.
I think we would just need to work with the council staff a little more. So for example, Alpine View. Alpine View is 39 point some acres. If they have to provide 10% as open space, then it becomes 3.9 acres, which is actually a bit more than what is in the council staff report saying totaling a minimum of 3.7.
They're 37 acres.
Oh, on the chart, it
That's
says
what
they're
we've combined.
39.
We combined the Aspen Hill Road Extended to do the analysis for the affordable housing, as noted
I
at the
see.
bottom.
But if that ends up being combined through a disposition process, they'll be 39 acres. That's why, again, we get a little concerned about super specific language in a plan, because it might end up being a 39-acre parcel.
Plan provided for
When we're done.
4.5 acres specifically.
Uh-huh.
And so we were just looking at how 4.5 acres specifically indicated in the plan
Yeah.
over 3 different properties.
I'm a little confused here, okay? We have no idea if these properties are gonna develop in a consolidated manner. We wouldn't want to force one property owner to bear the burden of other property owners' open space without getting compensated for that.
No, we aren't
I
suggesting
think all Luis
that.
was saying is that if you have one property, you still want them to have as much open space as possible in one place, not to say that it's consolidated in the sense that everybody else's adjoining.
You're saying
properties are-
within each property.
Yeah, as opposed
Strive
to.
for the largest
Oh, here's a
contiguous
little
space.
strip of land
Pocket
that was
park.
left over in the middle of the parking lot, so we're gonna count that as a piece of our.
But if this is based on 10%, why wouldn't we just say 10%, rather than saying everybody is combined for 4.5 acres of open space you want to consolidate? Why don't we say there's a preference for consolidation to maximize community benefit because we want centralized civic greens, and that the policy goal is 10% of the acreage? And then if we get Aspen Hill extended, which we hope and expect to happen, that the council and the county executive will be working in tandem to turn that into, maximize affordable housing as a result, then the 10% increases it a bit, and that is a good thing.
Got it.
And
Yes.
agreed, and again, I think what we're trying to avoid is having, I think what Luis is saying is a whole series of little pocket parks. We might want 1 or 2 pocket parks, but the third space we might want as bigger.
I think the policy preference for consolidation is
Say in the
to
plan,
maximize public benefit and, because we want civic greens. I mean, however that is worded, I mean, I think that is the interest. I just have a concern about, combining everybody's property into one place. It's not a community property. These are privately held properties and should be treated as such.
I think what I heard from you, Director Anderson, or Chairman, is Chairman or Director? Chairman, excuse me, I demoted you. Yeah, yeah,
as we promoted Gwen, I'm fine.
yeah. Is preference for consolidation, we can do both here, right? We can say preference for consolidation, but realizing that they're not all gonna be contiguous.
but that doesn't
done
mean
at the same time.
consolidation with other properties, that just means that we'd like to see the open space not be
space.
dispersed.
Right.
Dribbled out across the.
I think that's a great policy goal. To your point, I don't think we should get much more specific than that personally, but, so,
I think we're all on the same page, yeah.
okay, great.
Clear as,
There's me.
I'm no crystal, but something short of a crystal.
Fogged glass.
clear as,
If we move into the section on environment, the plan also sets environmental goals that provide a basis for its recommendations. And these goals are to increase tree canopy cover and diversity of tree species, to improve water quality through stormwater management retrofits and impervious surface reduction, reducing energy consumption, increasing air quality, and then fourth, protecting and improving the natural resources in the area. And the council received testimony from the Rock Creek Palisades Citizens Association advocating for the improved air quality, greater stormwater management, and the maintenance of tree cover in the plan area. Wheaton Hills Civic Association also provided testimony to support the improved stormwater management and protection of Joseph's Run. To increase tree canopy cover, the plan recommends incorporating street trees along Veers Mill Road, using advanced planting techniques to increase the soil area for tree roots, and establishing a minimum 30% tree canopy cover for new or retrofitted surface parking areas. The zoning ordinance currently requires that each parking lot maintain a minimum tree canopy of 25%. And so while 5% increase in coverage may seem like a small increase, it's still unclear in combination with the significant stormwater management retrofits that this area may need, that on every site, the 30% tree canopy cover might be feasible. So staff is just recommending that we add language to say where feasible, that 30% is where we'd like to see this go, but in some cases, we may have areas where it's not achievable given other requirements for stormwater and other environmental remediation.
agree with that? Any objection to that?
No.
Okay, and then staff supported all the other environmental recommendations. There was nothing that stood out as an issue. We move into community facilities. And the residents, as the plan notes, the residents of the Veers Mill Corridor are well-served by community facilities, including parks, trails, community centers, libraries, and schools. The plan does not recommend any new facilities, but recommends improved connection between the existing facilities and transit, and to help strengthen and enhance and promote these facilities and services. With respect to schools, the master plan area includes part of the Down County Consortium and 3 other MCPS high school clusters, Richard Montgomery, Rockville, and Walter Johnson. These are listed on tables 6 and 7 on page 65 of the plan. At full build-out of the plan, development potential is estimated to result in 286 elementary students, 116 middle school students, and 162 high school students. And it is estimated that the build-out of the plan requiring redevelopment would take almost 20 years. So at full build-out, as you can see, the plan itself doesn't require a complete new school. The plan's recommendation with respect to school facilities is to ensure that options for providing adequate student enrollment capacity within Richard Montgomery and the Down County Consortium high school level are looked at in particular during the development review and at the high school level. There's no recommendation for a school site, as it's not needed for any one of the school levels, and staff supports this recommendation.
Andrew?
Thank you. This is really just a point of clarification. I just want to make sure on table 7, and I don't know if this is a staff question or a planning question, but Walter Johnson isn't included. It's included in the service areas, but not in the impact. And I just want to make sure, I'm assuming that's because none of the zoning changes, in particular in the plan, are in the WJ cluster, and so there is no enrollment impact as a result of zoning changes as part of this plan, and that's why it's not included there. Is that accurate?
Yes.
That, and for the record, my name's Jessica McVeary with planning. The portion of the plan area that's within the Walter Johnson cluster is actually parkland. It's part of the Rock Creek Park, so there's not actually any zoning recommendations that are associated with the Walter Johnson cluster in the plan.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure. Thanks.
So you'll have to rerun those numbers, though, I think, based on the committee recommendation, or?
The numbers will have to be rerun just to get the student count for the increased density. But with the student generation rate on multifamily is relatively low, it probably not changed dramatically. And then the last piece for today was really to revisit the Department of Recreation Administrative Office's site. The plan recommends rezoning this to CR1 with a no commercial density, 1 residential density, and a height of 65 feet. The council did receive testimony from the Montgomery Housing Partnership suggesting that county-owned property should be used to its maximum potential for affordable housing. The council also received correspondence from the county executive stating that he concurs with the planning board recommendation, but with a slight adjustment to commercial FAR, and requested a 0.5 in commercial. The 0.5 commercial on this property, given the size, would actually result in 130,000 square feet of commercial uses, which is basically equivalent to the Stony Mill Square Shopping Center across the street, which is quite large. Council staff understands that obviously having some commercial component in for flexibility for a 20-year plan is perfectly reasonable, but would suggest that commercial density be limited to 0.25, which would still allow for up to 65,000 square feet of commercial development on the property.
And why do you think we ought to be more constrained with commercial development there?
Well, it's not even a property that is abutting, across the street from residential developments, but it actually shares property lines with residential properties on that site. It's 6 acres in size. The thought that, if you can imagine the Stony Mill Shopping Square with the unique thrift in it and that large complex, that's 130,000 square feet of commercial uses. To take that much commercial and put it on the rec center site seems to be quite intensive when you have property lines bordering residential houses. Anyway.
Thank you. That was going to be one of my questions. But building on that, is there, so that it's the difference is the county executive recommended 0.50,
Yes,
and this, and you're saying 0.25?
correct. That's still, 65,000
Right.
square feet, which is even larger than a lot of grocery stores.
Sure, yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's about the size of a large grocery store. Is there a middle ground in between there? Are you allowed to do that?
In this, there's not. The
I
zoning.
didn't think so. That's what.
Right,
okay.
allows increments of 0.25.
Yeah, because I know that area really well. It'd be nice to be able to do more than a couple things over there commercially for those of us in that part of the world, but the housing is certainly very, very important as well.
And I think because this is going to be predominantly housing, the more likely commercial might be a little market,
yeah.
a dry cleaner, things that would serve the residents and not actually be a destination shopping center. Because don't forget, you have other areas right there that have the significant commercial development the residents need.
Rick, do you
Thank you.
want to, I have a question, though. This is the county's property,
Correct.
so nothing's going to happen here, presumably, that the county isn't pretty well comfortable with. Why not reserve more flexibility to our own, position?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Greg Austin, Department of General Services. And that is what the county executive is looking for this site is flexibility. We've known for quite some time in tracking the master plan that we would have a much larger conversation about this six acres, given its proximity. Executive shares your concerns and the planning staff's concerns about compatibility with the surrounding residential, and so all of Ms. Dunn's points and the staff are well taken. That said, we are looking for flexibility. I don't think it's anyone's intent or desire or vision to replicate a shopping center on this site. That's not what we're looking for. We want to leave all those options available. Whether that's 0.25 or 0.5, we put the 0.5 in there. Obviously, if you do the math, it's 130,000 square feet. I don't know that that's the order of magnitude. This will all be evaluated by council again at the disposition process, and so you'll have another bite at this apple if you're not happy with the product that comes forward.
And it's not just retail. That's the important thing to note. It could be a small office building, which would be on multiple floors. So, again, I honestly, I don't think we have a position about the 0.25 versus the 0.5. I'm just trying to remind you that it's not just retail. It could also be office.
And that was a great point. I was going to say, we could be talking about jobs and economic development in addition to, the more traditional services that are provided by those types of shopping centers. Is there, GSA, have there been any discussions about, I know you said flexibility, but more specifically about thoughts?
We have not. The county executive has not, we've not been able to dialogue with the county executive beyond just the zoning conversation. Again, new administration, we knew that it would be this executive's decision on how this property moves forward with the rec offices moving out next year, moving to Wheaton. And we are in this inception of having those conversations. This will be a lengthy conversation over the next 18 months or so about what we do with this property. We do understand there are a lot of suggestions, opinions, and ideas out there, and certainly we'll want to take all those to the county executive before he has us initiate the reuse analysis. But it will need to go through a preliminary reuse analysis, another reuse analysis for outside or for other agencies, and then ultimately could go out to the general public. But again, a lot of steps in between. So,
Thank you.
So I think I'm going to go with the planning board on this one. Are we all in agreement on that, I think? Okay.
to be clear, the planning board.
Ah, sorry.
Executive's
County executive.
recommendation.
Thank you. That's what I meant.
0.5 FAR.
0.5.
CR.
I think that covers it. Hey, we did our first master plan. All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Hey, I'm excited. That was fun.
That's good.
Thank you for all your work. Great job to the planning staff. You guys did a marvelous job on this plan, and we'll take it up at full council. We'll see how good a job we did there, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll see what the language looks like.
Yeah.
Decide how badly we.
A lot of